This does feel much more than the first one. This does feel like we're moving into prequel territory.
Very much, yeah.
It also feels like we're moving a lot of pieces around in order for those things to come to fruition further on. And I think that is one of the problems with it. I think there are times when the plotting seems unnecessarily convoluted and dense. In J.K. Rowling's defense, although not like she needs defending, if you look at the Star Wars prequels, and when you've created a universe that's this big and this complicated, it's always going to be the case that if you go back and start, there is an awful lot of stuff to deal with. That said, my own feeling was that, I mean, I know how much the Potter fans and the Wizard World universe fans enjoy all this stuff, but I felt there was one too many backstory stories fighting for position. And that's what I mean about there were times when it definitely felt like what we were doing was getting things into place for something that we were going to have later on. I mean, tonally, it's weird because it slips between spectacular set pieces. I mean, you talk about the breakout, which is at the very, very beginning of the film. It's not a plot spoiler. At the very, very beginning of the film, there is this spectacular breakout, which is a hugely mounted, visual effects set piece. There are other moments in it which are kind of, knockabout comedy, Newt wrangling the animals, individual sort of character interactions, which are sort of broadly comedic. But there's also this kind of sense of brooding melancholia that reminds us of, I mean, actually, particularly the first episode of Deathly Hallows, which was, would you call it Harry on camping? And yet, there was that sense of the core characters being removed. But there are long sections which are very dark, very moody, very kind of downplayed, which is odd when they're sort of set off against these kind of more explosive set pieces. For me, I found there was an awful lot of exposition, rather too much, I have to say. There was an awful lot of pieces being moved around for something that was going to happen later on. But it did come together in the third act, if we can call it that. And there is a moment about sort of 2/3 of the way through the film when it all starts to come together. And then there is this one sort of great big, I'm not going to spoil, there is this one sort of great big set piece in which it actually did something which I hadn't expected it to do. And, you talked about the way in which it's playing with what we know about history, and the timing is very specific, and the names of characters are very specific, and we know where history is going. And we also know that at the center of it, you have this character who, spins a kind of web of lies and deceit by, invoking conflicts in order to actually spread this kind of poisonous, pure blood, philosophy, whilst at the same time saying that what they're actually doing is doing it for peace and to make the world better. And I think that stuff actually works quite well. Also, I mean, Ezra Miller, I've always thought, Ezra Miller is a very, very charismatic screen presence. And certainly in this, you felt, you talked about this with Catherine Waterston about how much you could or couldn't say. And what you could say was that he's a character who has been very, very conflicted about his identity. And what he wants is an identity. And actually that fits in with, I think, the political ethos of the film, which is that when somebody is struggling for an identity, when somebody is struggling for an answer, there are things towards which they will be drawn that seem attractive because what they seem to do is to offer easy answers. So I think overall, it's a very odd hodgepodge. I think there's no question that it's uneven, and I think, and much as I have huge respect for the creation of this world, I think there are points at which it suffers from that Star Wars thing of the story is getting lost amidst you filling in that detail and filling in that. And what that also means is that tonally, that strange thing about going from action to comedy to downers to action to comedy, it doesn't happen in a smooth wave. It happens in a kind of episodic way. I have no doubt whatsoever that fans of the series there is much to enjoy, and it's impossible not to feel your heart swell at moments when it takes us towards territory in which we have so much invested already. But it is very uneven. There are things in it that work very well, but it is very uneven, and there is a lot of people explaining the plot.